Why the fuck would anyone want to try and survive a nuclear apocalypse is what I want to know. How does that look like in any way, shape, or form a good idea?
I have told you my reasons all the time. I will become Lord Humongous and I will rape my way through the survivors.
You just want to do a fucking Mad Max LARP. That is all you want to do.
Yes.
as the film that we have watched today shows, it doesn't turn out like Mad Max, dude. There are no awesome vehicles that have been chromed up. There will be no one chanting V8. No one will witness you. You're just going to be dying in a corner of, like, your skin because it's melted off now, fam. Congrats.
And I'll still be more musclier than Dave. Get fucked.
Yeah, we're doing depression kino again, by the way. We should probably introduce, like, you know how we every so often, well, and by every so often I mean once before, have done a video that's not about anime, and it did terribly because we're a channel about anime and that's what the YouTube algorithm wants to promote, but we did it anyway because fuck y'all.
Yeah, but Dave, we don't care about things like that. We're freaks.
There's a reason why we've been doing this for years now, and we haven't even hit 2K subs yet. It's because we're incompetent and we don't know how to play the game. But anyway, on that note, yeah, more depression kino, boys. This is a video series about cinema that is incredibly depressing. And there's probably nothing more depressing than a whole story about the way the world ends with a bang and then a whimper. And that is Threads to a T. Rob, could you please describe what you have just recently watched?
The most northern thing I've ever watched on British television.
Pretty fucking northern, holy shit.
Yeah, we watched, well, no spoilers, but, you know, Traffic Warden Death Squads is the future I want and voted for, so let's keep going with this.
That feels like something that Boris Johnson would go for.
I mean, you know, it's 2 steps away from bendy buses. Let's go, boys.
Yeah, so we watched Threads, which is a 1984. I've seen it referred to as a docudrama, and that sounds fancy, and I'm incompetent, so I'm going to go with that. A 1984 docudrama that's basically about how the world ends. Spoiler alert, really bad.
It's also the first ever cultural depiction of what we now know in modern culture as nuclear winter, but during the time period, that wasn't actually a commonly held belief till after this film.
Yeah, that was brand new research that was really only just coming out in the years immediately prior to the release of Threads. So it's science fiction in the truest sense. It's taking very, very up-to-date, or at the time, very modern scientific research and going, that would make a really interesting story. And by interesting, I mean literally everyone dies.
Just for clarity's sake, the theory of nuclear winter only came out in 1983, and this film came out in the meme year of 1984. As we now know, through modern conflicts that have occurred recently, is we know that is completely correct, and we will literally all die. Thanks, Q8.
The story, it focuses on Ruth and Jimmy, who are 2 young people living in Sheffield from kind of, this is a Barry Hines project, so they are from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Ruth is kind of middle class, Jimmy more working class, but they're together. They've discovered that Ruth is pregnant. They're sort of maybe going to be starting a family, but all of it in the backdrop of this rising nuclear tension across the world in which they are completely powerless to change anything because they're just 2 young people from fucking Sheffield. And then their worst fears are realized, nukes drop, everyone dies, and that is the film. Nothing happy happens. It's either tense or depressing or horrifying, and then everyone dies, and it's fucking awesome.
I don't know how much we could show before we get copyrighted, but the one thing I would love for us to be able to include is the scene where the looters are shot, where the soldiers find the 3 looters and they shoot one, and then it's like they look to see what they looted and they're like, oh, there's a packet of crisps in here, mate, and he's like, oh, it's fucking prawn cocktail. Fucking hate that shit. And I was like, that is how the British apocalypse will happen.
That is North posting at its finest.
Yeah, like,
oh, fucking prawn cocktail.
Like, I'm not gonna lie, if I was in the fucking police death squads and I had to shoot a looter and they only had a packet of skips, I'd probably crush the skull.
Rob, it concerns me how that your immediate thought is, man, wouldn't it be fucking awesome being a police death squad member in the apocalypse? You fucking worry me, dude.
Basically a BBC docudrama exploring things from science. It was using ideas from Carl Sagan and a load of other things that they formed to make this TV series, and it was specifically filmed in Sheffield because Sheffield Council, for example, had a nuclear-free zone policy. Britain was completely...
They were pretty pro-nuclear at the time.
Yeah, Britain itself is pro-nuclear, but all these city councils had... It's basically, this is the era of militant tendency. This is CND, this is Labour, this is Thatcher, this is like the mining strike is 1984. This is all ongoing, right? Most post-apocalypse films don't actually show the apocalypse at all. Your Dawn of the Dead, Your Night of the Living Dead, all that. They don't show the actual crisis. Even Mad Max doesn't show the crisis that's actually happening. It just shows the descent into madness. This shows from the moment the tensions in the war beginning. It even shows you the pre-nuclear exchange where the Americans go to bomb a military base and the Russians use nukes to stop them, and it just ramps up the tension as this film's going. It takes about 50 minutes for the actual apocalypse to occur in this, and then it occurs.
I think modern apocalyptic dramas, it tends to be like your Walking Dead sort of thing, like a band of plucky survivors coming together to try and rebuild civilization. There is none of that here. This is not a plucky band of survivors rebuilding the world. This is not Mad Max where they're driving around in awesome cars. This is the nukes drop and everyone fucking dies. This is the end of the world. This is the end of humanity depicted without filter, without hesitation. They are not fucking around, and by the end of it, you are going to be quite bummed out, because this is not a cheerful movie. This is a movie about the end of the world, and I do seriously mean that. When this movie ends, the message is, in this universe, we are fucked.
People forget that British sci-fi is fucked in a really fantastic way that American sci-fi can't do.
American sci-fi can get dark at points, but it's usually American sci-fi that's heavily influenced by British sci-fi, probably a bit of the Russian sci-fi as well.
But it's all John Wyndham, Terry Nation.
Yeah, J.G. Ballard as well. All of these guys writing this really grim, depressing stuff about the future, where the sheep look up as well. Anyway, we are getting massively off track and talking about British television and North Posting, so love telly.
Simple as.
Hey, American cinema, simple as.
Honestly, I hate Yanks in every way possible. So this is a very British posting episode. For anyone that is not British, they can leave.
Hey, foreigners.
They can leave.
Hey, nuclear explosions.
Love the wife.
Love me pints. Love me footy. Simple as.
North Posting will be the only thing that will save this country.
It clearly doesn't, because everyone in this film is fucking North Posting, and it doesn't work out great for them.
That's only because Southerners are in charge, but you're not paying attention.
Put North in charge, we'll have this fucking sorted out, bastards.
Few people laughed. Few people cried.
Anyway, so this was directed by a chap by the name of Mick Jackson, who's had quite an interesting career, to be honest. He started out doing like science documentaries and stuff for the BBC, but kind of after Threads, he jumped across the pond to Hollywood, and he's actually directed some pretty big releases over the years. He was the guy who did The Bodyguard. He did a recent film as well called Denial, so he's done some pretty major stuff with some big stars.
He also did Volcano, which is like one of the worst films I've ever watched.
You can't get him right all the time, man. You can't get him right all the time.
He's also the director of A Very British Coup, which is like a really good story if you know the background to it.
The writer for this is a chap by the name of Barry Hines. He's probably more known for his literature and his novels that he's written. So he wrote A Kestrel for a Knave, which is the basis for the film Kess, which is something he also wrote, but a very, very popular book, very, very well-regarded film as well. He's very well-regarded and very famous for his focus on dialogue, so he's keen to kind of capture that North sound.
He's also a long-time collaborator with Ken Loach.
He's very well known for his socio-political themes in his stories. He's a lefty. He's a big old lefty, was Barry Hines, and that shows in the
To our American viewers, before they start going apeshit, lefty does not mean the same as what your lefty means. Fuck off, commies.
Our cinematographer is a man by the name of Andrew Dunn. He's won awards for cinematography in The Madness of King George, which is really good, actually. A very well-regarded movie. The main cast for this, honestly, the only one that people might have heard of is the guy who does the narration, which is Paul Vaughan, who did a lot of BBC science documentaries and stuff.
Specifically, he's the Horizon narrator. And Terry Wogan's on in the background of one of the fucking radio shows. And if you don't know who Terry Wogan is, you can get out.
Yeah, no, and that he's probably the only member of the cast that anyone might have heard of.
And Leslie Judd is in it as well, who is a Blue Peter presenter. But she is famous for being in Monty Python. She also was on Top of the Pops, if I remember rightly. Also, the actor Zach Dingle from EastEnders is a character in it. If you don't know who Zach Dingle is, that's more North Posting for you. Get it?
Yeah, so I guess those are the two, before Rob corrects me again.
There was also Jane Hazelgrove, who was in The Bill, Lending Burning, Jonathan Crete. I think she's in Holby City as well. There's also Rita May, who was...
Who cares?
But these are all basically soap opera actors, is what Dave is trying to get to. So they're not known by anyone apart from people with specific levels of... Apparently, according to the comments, we're not allowed to say autism anymore, but, fuck them.
Yeah, they are on soap operas a lot. You'll still see, I think the guy who plays Jimmy, Reese Dinsdale, he's on Emmerdale at the moment. Karen Meager, she plays Ruth, who's kind of the main character, I guess you could say. I haven't seen any project that she's been involved in recently. She is pretty heavily involved in the campaign for nuclear nuclear disarmament, though. It's like she starred in a nuclear apocalypse movie. A pretty sad one, actually, is Victoria O'Keeffe, who played Ruth and Jimmy's daughter, Jane. She was kind of an up-and-coming actress, but very sadly, she was killed in a car accident in the year 1990, so never got to see more of her, unfortunately, but she does a damn good job in this. Honestly, all of the actors in this, and the extras as well, do fantastic work.
Also, because they are incompetent, both Dave and Rob forgot to mention the editors, Jim Latham and Donna Bickerstaff. Without them, this movie would have looked like shit, so they deserve a lot of credit.
A World War II every second for the length of a lazy afternoon.
The genesis of Threads kind of goes back quite a long ways. You can trace it all the way back to the docudrama that it's the spiritual successor to, which is 1966's The War Game, which, similar to Threads, is trying to depict a nuclear conflict and its aftermath. And again, they were trying at the time to be pretty thorough with their research.
Dave did say it was released in 1966. It was not. It was completely banned until 1985.
It had a limited release in 1966, which is why I put 1966. But yeah, you are absolutely correct. It was banned, basically. Well, not banned, but the British government at the time pressured the BBC to
never release it
because they didn't like how at the time, everyone was getting pretty jingoistic, like, yeah, absolutely, we could totally survive a nuclear war. All you need to do is just follow the advice given to you by this wonderful government pamphlet.
And just so we're clear to everyone else who's listening to this in modern times, just remember all the advice you've been given in the last 6 months.
Rob, don't get us fucking banned. So to get back to it, The War Game, it's pretty dated just now, to be honest. It's a decent enough thing to watch if you want to have an understanding of what people thought nuclear war would look like back in the mid-60s.
Yeah, because isn't it more based on, for example, the experience suffered during both the Blitz and the German bombing, and comparing it to Hiroshima, where it was like, oh, they'll use a 1 megaton nuclear weapon. It's like, we don't have 1 megaton nuclear bombs. They're much cooler.
It's more talking about the immediate aftermath, what it would do to a city in the immediate wake of something like Hiroshima, which, to be fair, is fucking horrifying, but it's not quite on the same level of what we know it to be now and what it would look like if the nukes were to be airbursted over Sheffield, for instance. But yeah, as we mentioned, the Conservative government at the time peer pressured the BBC into not releasing it, which they ultimately caved into. Yeah, that's a bit of a black mark in the BBC's history, and it was one that a lot of the people who worked for the Beeb were quite embarrassed about, which is one of the reasons why they went for Threads and why they were willing to kind of bankroll that in the first place.
One of the reasons, I think the government pressured them to ban it, but the BBC also banned it because they believed people would kill themselves after watching War Game.
Cowards.
And it's like, having watched Threads...
We mentioned earlier that Mick Jackson was a man who did BBC Science documentaries prior to him becoming a fancy Hollywood director. And one of the documentaries that he did for the BBC was a little project, I think it was released just a couple of years prior to Threads, called A Guide to Armageddon, which was them trying to explore what the actual effects of a nuclear exchange would be like on the human body and how it would just fuck us up horrendously. And it was very popular. It got a lot of engagement, probably traumatized a few people as well, which was probably what they were going for. And that was what kind of set off the idea for Jackson, at least, where he was like, I want to explore this idea further of what the effects of a nuclear exchange would be, not just on the human body, but on society and the world at large. And that's where you can kind of see the formation of Threads. And yeah, I guess the final sort of bit of background for Threads as well is one that you touched on earlier, Rob, with the research that went into it. Nuclear Winter, this is the first sort of film that actually tries to depict it. No one had really depicted it before because it wasn't really around as a concept before. The term was kind of coined by Carl Sagan, of all people, and a group of other sort of international scientists. Nuclear Winter, Global Consequences of Multiple Nuclear Explosions.
Global Consequences? Sounds like the Industrial Revolution, my friend.
Prior to the concept of nuclear winter, the perception was that nuclear war would be really fucking
cool.
Potentially survivable. What Nuclear Winter told us was that if there is a sufficiently large enough nuclear exchange, we are all going to fucking die, along with basically all other life on this planet.
I think it's because people's concept of nuclear warfare, most people are aware of MAD, which is mutually assured destruction. I think we've talked previously on the channel about preemptive and second strike and first strike. If you want me to quickly go over that, I will.
Let's go over that, why not? We're doing a science episode now.
So mutually assured destruction is the plan of, I've got a gun, you've got a gun, we can both shoot each other at the same time, we both die.
Hey, you, back the fuck up. Back the fuck up or I shoot myself right now.
Okay, I'm not moving, man.
I'll fucking do it. I swear to God.
That's what most nuclear war comes down to. You have to have enough nukes to retaliate. So that's where the concept of first, second, and preemptive strike is. Preemptive strike is you hit all their nuclear targets and you win. GG, no re. First strike is the same, but it's like you're able to launch first. Or you have second strike, which is you have enough nukes that they can't hit, so you can fire them back. That's mad. It's basically a chess game of nukes. The actual US policy was massive retaliation, which was even if the Russians could have nuked first or detonated their own nuke, the Americans' plan was just to destroy Russia and everything about it until you get into the era of JFK and Robert McNamara, where the Americans are like, we can win. They followed the first strike policy where they could win a nuclear war relatively unharmed, I think is the quote that Robert McNamara uses, where they built their idea there was a missile gap between the US and the Soviet Union where they were like, we've got more bombs and missiles, so fuck them, we can win. And then it's not until much later on they realize it's like, yeah, you can't win. Like, thanks Nixon for literally saving the planet. People forget that, de-escalation was entirely Richard Nixon. Fuck everyone. Richard Nixon was the best president. Fight me.
Why is it that you have to find some sort of controversial hill to die on in every single fucking video?
I will die on the hill that is Richard Nixon saving the planet. Fuck everyone.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita.
I think that brings us pretty nicely into a discussion of what when I say enjoyed. Enjoyed is not really a word that you would use about threads. You don't enjoy threads, you experience threads, but it's an incredibly rewarding piece of cinema and a fascinating piece of cinema, but it's not something you will enjoy.
Yeah, you don't set out your day to go, yeah, you know what I'm going to watch today? Abject misery. It's harrowing. They kill a cat, man. Jesus Christ. It's amazing, but it's...
Because you're just out of watching this at this point. You watched it earlier today, so you're still post. I think it definitely deserves props for its research. Like for one, we've mentioned this earlier. Mick Jackson, Barry Hines, all of the team behind this film really went out of their way to try and make it as real as possible and give it that sense of groundedness, I guess you could say. Some of that is in how they film it and how they've written it, but a lot of it is in how they've researched it, because it's an incredibly well-informed piece of media that clearly has had a lot of thought and a lot of research put into it to give it that visceral sense of what a nuclear exchange would do to a population like Sheffield.
It would fucking die.
To single it out again, the writing and the directing are well worth praise here. For all Barry Hines kind of fucking hated Mick Jackson, apparently, because he thought that Mick Jackson was a posh boy, amongst other things. I think the two of them working together on this are a really, really powerful mix.
Well, you see, Dave, if you look this up, right, look up where Barry Hines was born. Hoyland.
North.
Where was Mick Jackson born?
South.
There you go. That's the entire...
North is south.
All you need to know,
The
mate.
dichotomy.
Enough said. I always forget that people don't realise that British racism isn't necessarily about skin colour, but it's more about the street you're born in.
You'll get murdered for that in some parts of the country.
Yeah, like...
The big thing that I was worried about when I forced you to watch this again, because let's be honest, I forced you to watch this because I'm a bastard. The thing I was worried about was that I knew that everything post-explosion is pretty awesome, if depressing, but what I was concerned about was the stuff that happens prior to the explosion. I was worried that was going to maybe have not held up quite as well.
It has aged, but I think the only thing that's properly aged it is the politics of what's going on around. But I think as we are going into this weird era of, what's the right word for like political stratification, where people are now so much more angrier about their political beliefs, is more a repeat of what happened in the 80s. So I personally don't think it's as aged as badly, but the politics they're arguing about has.
This is down to Barry Hines. He writes a really fantastic script here, in that I am actually invested in Ruth and Jimmy's story. I'm also dragged along by this sense of tension that he's written into the script, and also the direction that Mick Jackson takes the whole project in, because it escalates over time. You're seeing the signs of this war ramping up, and you know that it's coming, and so that pulls you along in a very compelling way.
Like the first 15 minutes is like that. Is it Dawn of the Dead? Like the remake, the Zack Snyder one, but like that bit where all the stuff's going on in the background, like you're seeing all this A&E's busy ear and all that. It's 50 minutes of that, and it works really well.
Because you are aware of what you're watching, and you know it's coming. And the characters kind of do as well. Like, these are powerless characters in so many ways, and it's almost like a horror film. Like, they have no control over their fate or the direction that it's all going to go. They're like the viewer in that sense. They can only watch as this deteriorates, as this conflict develops. And even, like, you have some characters in this who get pressed into the Civil Defense Corps, and, you know, the man who is going to be Sheffield Warlord if in the event of shit kicking off. Even those guys ultimately find themselves completely powerless and ineffectual in the wake of this nuclear exchange. So it's a very disempowering movie for all of the characters, and that fits really well for the theme that they're trying to drive home here. So fantastically well written movie. The budget for this film is fucking minuscule, to be honest. Like, I've seen it reported as low as £250,000. I've seen it reported as high as around £400,000, but this is, compared to what films are normally shot for, which is, you know, in the millions, even for smaller productions, this budget is fucking tiny. But they worked it in a very, very clever way. They used connections and resources, and they called up support from certain quarters. You mentioned earlier the Sheffield City Council were pretty heavily involved and allowed them to shoot a lot of the film for pretty much for free in areas because they were kind of into the whole cause of let's not die in a nuclear explosion.
Well, they're the kind of centre of the campaign for nuclear disarmament, Sheffield.
They were the other folks as well. A lot of the extras that you see in this movie, they're very good extras. They properly are pulling their weight. There's a reason for that. A lot of these guys are members of the campaign for nuclear disarmament and have been called up to help support and create this movie. So they're impassioned for this. They are wanting to kind of get the message across, and that really pays off there, I think. The rest of it is just really good decisions, good framing, and fantastic camera work and editing. And I think that's encapsulated. We were just talking about this earlier, Rob. I do want to enthuse about the scene where it goes from ratcheting up the tension to the final kind of payoff of that tension that they've built around the 50-minute mark, as you put it. That is when they show the nuclear exchange. And
to be honest, I don't think anything we can actually talk about will fully cover how horrible it is. No. People should just watch that. You can skip most of the rest of the film, but if you watch that, that is how nuclear war will occur.
Like, build up to it, it gives you more context and it maybe invests you a little bit more. But even just watching that kind of 10-minute sequence of
horror,
them depicting an airburst over Sheffield and then a direct explosion just outside its immediate vicinity, it's one of the finest pieces of editing and cinematography combined together to create this really, really powerful, hard-hitting sequence that I've ever seen. And it was shot on a budget, again, of either £250,000 to £400,000.
Jesus Christ, they've done it. Done it.
It's even the whole telex machine being fired, all the typing
That's
and
so
everything.
well
and to
done.
do all the edits, it's all these, like, Threads has been borrowed by so many other things. Like, it's
masterful. It really is. Down to its, as you're mentioning there, like the sound design, it's cutting away to this really, really detached clinical text being blasted onto the screen with this really, really loud, sharp telex sound. It starts off with like the sirens, and then it spreads into people screaming, cutting into with all this telex sounds. The first explosion from the airburst hits, more screaming, more panic, more terror, and then it just stops. And there is this bright flash, and then it's completely silent as they are showing these sudden quick flashes of just horrible shit happening to people, like folk on fire, buildings burning, glass being incinerated, and then the explosion hits. And the explosions in this, it's really clever. It's just a fucking zoom cut. It's just zooming in and then they cut to an explosion. But it works so fucking well because it's built up to in an incredible way. It's just, anyone who is thinking of having a career as a filmmaker and ever worries that, oh, but I don't have the budget to do amazing things, or I don't have the knowledge to like 3D animate all this stuff. You don't need to, my dude. Watch this. This is a demonstration of if you know what you're doing, you know how to frame it, and you know how to cut it together and then make it sound amazing, it doesn't matter because you'll hit the audience in the balls and they will be rolling around on the floor for the rest of the production, because that is what happens in Threads. You are just left kind of shell-shocked from that 10-minute sequence for the rest of the movie in the same way that all of the characters are.
It's why whenever Threads has been shown, it always comes around to a discussion of nuclear armament and all things like that. Like, it generally, if Threads gets shown, it's a thing, if you will. There's no negative to Threads other than the abject misery you feel afterwards, which is not actually a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's just...
I have one or two negatives that I'll discuss, but they're very small, slight disagreements with the direction. Generally speaking, this is probably the best nuclear apocalypse movie that has ever been made. I would love to see someone try and do something like Threads with a bigger budget, but quite frankly, no one has the balls to do something this brutal and this harrowing in this day and age. No company or studio would ever have the nuts to sign off on this.
To impress him, takes on his multi-armed form.
Well, with that, I guess, we've mentioned earlier, as we are trying to review this, we've probably kind of conveyed our feelings about this movie already, in that it's fantastic. I do have but one or two grumbles, and that is really it. I think the obvious one is the effects, they're a little bit dated, and you can tell that this was, in some places, shot on a pretty limited budget. Like, they're using tomato ketchup and Rice Krispies for, like, the burns and stuff in here and there. There's a couple spots where it looks a little patchy, but by that point, they've already kind of hit you with a money shot, so you don't care anymore. You're in, you are hooked. The grumble that I've heard that I agree with is the use of the narrator.
The first fallout dust settles on Sheffield. It's an hour and 25 minutes after the attack.
Because as we've mentioned, this is a docudrama, and so in the style of British documentaries at the time, you have Paul Vaughan coming in doing some narration over sections of it.
To be fair, nowadays you'd have like Louis Theroux doing this.
I could do without that. I like Louis Theroux, don't get me wrong.
So, how are you coping with being in the internment camp?
Fucking hate it. Could probably roast you over a fire at this point, Louis Theroux. I'll be quite frank with you. We are considering cannibalism. I feel that takes me out of it a little bit too much, if you know what I mean. It feels a little bit too BBC documentary, and suddenly we've got this man here to explain it. Because they already have a perfectly good way of incorporating a lot of information into it, because they have, like, what you were describing earlier with the telex machines flashing up dialogue and stuff. I feel that was a perfectly solid and very well executed way of conveying information to the audience without really taking you out of it, whereas I found that the narration really took me out of it. That's one of the things that Mick Jackson and Barry Hines fell out about. Barry Hines was fiercely opposed to the narrator being used, although ultimately it was. I'm kind of with Hines on this one, to be honest, but only a little bit, because the rest of the film just keeps pulling you in. You wish it wouldn't, but it does.
My negative for this is everything after the nuclear explosion just doesn't matter, because you're kind of just left in shock, and everything after that is like, oh, we're going to put more shock factor into it. Where it's like, I think the message of the film is gotten across in the first 6 months afterwards, but I get where they were going with it, if you know what I mean.
I like that they take it to the full extreme of them showing that there is not going to be another generation after this.
I think that's the thing, is that bit where it shows all the nuclear winter and it should have shown basically up until they run out of resources. I didn't need the decade later bit, if you get what I mean. I think they should have I think that was revealing too much. I think it is really well done, but I just think it's not needed. Yeah, no, it's there isn't really any real negatives to it. It's just kind of like, I always think the ending is just obscene, but like, obscene is the wrong word, but I think it's just, what's the line that James Cameron uses to describe the director's cut of Aliens? It's like 20 miles of bad road. I feel the ending is an extra 20 miles of bad road that I already knew was going to happen. I just didn't need it.
I know, I get your point. Please stop picking me.
Basically, yeah.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
The other bit that we were going to talk about, or that I wanted to bring up, was kind of the impact of Threads.
Oh, I think actually the biggest thing we can talk about is actually US foreign policy. The Cold War split up into a lot of things. We talked about Detente earlier. How much of this makes it into the video, I don't know.
It didn't, because otherwise the video would be over an hour in length, and the thought of editing a video that long makes me want to die.
For example, Ronald Reagan was very much in favor of a thing called, I think it's confrontism is what Reagan puts it, but it's basically confronting the USSR and arguing with them. It's where the Reagan doctrine comes from. So Reagan was doing the whole, let's rearm all the nukes, and everyone's going, please don't. The biggest impact this had was on, it becomes more the tear down this wall and stuff as opposed to confronting them militarily.
You see a shift in the doctrine around nuclear war around the time that Threads comes out. It's not just because of Threads, but Jackson has stated that he has it on good authority that Ronald Reagan did watch Threads. Threads is kind of part of that thrust of the nuclear winter hypothesis, where we had this new research emerging that revealed to everyone in pretty accurate detail the full horror of what a nuclear war would be, and it certainly forced things like the British authorities and the American authorities to reconsider how they were approaching things.
Well, you mentioned the British authorities, but I find one of the most interesting things that's forgotten about with the Cold War is the Reykjavik conference. So that's where the two superpowers met. Pretty cool, pretty great. Ronald Reagan, Gorbachev, they come together to meet. Yeah, so both they were trying to get SALT signed, if I remember rightly, in SALT 2. Yeah, so Reagan and Gorbachev came to the idea that actually, what if we got rid of all our nuclear weapons? And Margaret Thatcher was like, we're not doing that.
That feels like a Thatcher move.
Yeah, so she took our milk. It's one of them interesting things where it's like, what a world we could have been in if it wasn't for Margaret Thatcher.
Is Thatcher dead? Let's find it. Honk if Thatcher's dead. Let's find it. That's a yes.
It's had some impacts on popular culture as well. It traumatized a lot of people when it first came out, one of whom was Charlie Brooker. Charlie Brooker's talked about it being a really, really heavy influence on Black Mirror, for instance, which is now it's weird how popular that's got. I remember when that was just a weird fucking Channel 4 production, and now it's like big Netflix thing that's incredibly popular. Good for them, of course, but this is a very, very heavy influence on a lot of the stuff that Charlie Brooker does, because Charlie Brooker has never been one to shy away from the harrowing and bleak endings.
Dead Set being one of the greatest TV shows ever.
Yeah, Dead Set is a fucking amazing. I wish there's more. You can't really find it online anymore, but that's 100% a recommendation as well. But he's, since his very early career as a screenwriter and as a television creative, always gone for these quite brutal endings, and I feel like Threads might have been kind of a catalyst for that, where it gives you that idea of, oh no, you don't have to have a happy ending in order to have an effective film. Sometimes the most effective ending is the one that just leaves your viewer just sitting there staring at the screen after it's finished going, oh.
I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
That brings us quite nicely to the conclusion of this video. As you've probably picked up from Rob and I's enthusement, this is I'd call it a hesitant recommendation, as with a lot of these sort of depression kino films. This is not a movie for everybody, because not everybody likes being made to feel existentially terrified, and
sad.
That's maybe not your vibe that you're going for right now, particularly in these fun times that we are living in. But if you're like Rob and I, and being a fucking weirdo who, enjoys feeling sad sometimes, hey buddy, do I have a treat for you? Because holy shit, this will do that.
Yeah, like if you've ever watched, 28 Days Later or Dawn of the Dead or anything like that, where you just feel bad. This ain't got shit on that.
Yeah, those actually have moderately positive endings. This don't.
You die.
I love this movie, man. It's brutal, but it's such a powerful experience to even now. Like right before we recorded this, I know you've just watched it, but I went back and I watched the scene where the explosion hits, just to kind of get in the vibe for recording this. And holy shit, even just watching that outside of the context of the rest of the movie, it's still such a powerful sequence, and it's a testament to the film as a whole and what they achieved. Rob, have you anything to add on that one?
Please like and subscribe to our North posting.
Is that how we're rounding this out? Is it just going to be North posting?
Yeah, why not?
YouTube, hate anime.
Just like the iron logarithm.
Love nuclear apocalypse dramas, simple as.
Only through kebabs did we conquer the globe.
Inevitably, when Scotland separates from the rest of the UK, because let's be honest, that's probably going to happen this year, the North can come. They're cool. They
we are part of the North. They are part of us.
Exactly. They can stay.
Love we heart giant robots.
It's all over anime channels. Love the Queen. Love me footy. Love giant robots.
Love Thatcher. Hate Blair.
Hate Code Geass.
It's Argon.
Simple as. This video brought to you by North Posting.